Karen DiBrango. I am the founder of Health Coach for You. I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach, certified gluten-free practitioner, and a certified functional nutrition counselor. And I first learned about Microbiome Labs at an educational dinner with Dr. Tom O'Brien. And if any of you are familiar, he's the guru of all gurus of all things functional medicine and gluten. And he's actually written the foreword in my book that's coming out now, which is 30 Days to Gluten Freedom. And when I met him, I actually learned about Microbiome Labs and I learned about the wheat rescue. So I think maybe we'll start there with wheat rescue, if you don't mind, Kiran. And it was really interesting to me because my journey was, I didn't have celiac disease, I did not have a wheat allergy, but yet I was still reactive to wheat and to gluten, and I didn't know why. And it wasn't until I met a certified gluten-free practitioner that I finally understood there's a whole spectrum of disorders with gluten. It's not just celiac and it's not just allergy. And I fell in the middle there with the non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So once my eyes were opened and I learned how to address the problem by now understanding the root cause, it just blew my mind how much better I was feeling. And of course, I had to then go and study and become a certified gluten-free practitioner as well. So that being said, Wheat Rescue is my favorite go-to product whenever I go out to eat or whenever I'm eating a meal that I personally did not prepare because of the cross-reactivity of many other things with gluten, but also because we get cross-contaminated a lot, right? So this is a fantastic product, and Kiran is here. He is with Microbiome Labs, and you are a microbiologist. Am I saying that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, okay, fantastic. And he's going to share with us all about the wheat rescue, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into what the total gut restoration program is. Okay, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Karen, just to verify, you can hear me okay? Clear enough?
I can hear you just fine, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Perfect.
Perfect. So, one of the reasons why we want to develop Wheat Rescue is, wheat and all the gluten-related proteins, right, are quite abrasive to the system in many ways. They cause damage inevitably in everybody, right? There are studies that show that 100% of people have transient leaky gut when exposed to gluten. Now, and like you said, in that spectrum, there are going to be people that are hypersensitive, and then there are people that are full-blown celiac disease. Your normal average person gets damage from exposure to wheat, but if the gut is healthy enough, it can repair relatively quickly, right? The analogy I use, it's almost like working out every single day without adequate time for your muscles to recover, right? Workouts are damaging to your system, but in order for it to be okay and actually gain the benefit of it, you need that time to recover. If you're exposed to wheat constantly, even if you're not on the ends of the spectrum where you're celiac or really sensitive or allergic to wheat, it's going to be causing damage in your gut. And unless your gut is continuously healthy, it cannot repair it fast enough over time for there not to be a net negative effect, right? So the whole idea behind Wheat Rescue is how do we reduce some of that negative impact that wheat has on most people? It's not a pass for someone who's celiac to go and eat a full sandwich, right, made out of wheat bread. But the idea is that let's reduce the damage that wheat does to the typical person that sees damage from wheat. And the idea here is that what we have to do is minimize the exposure of the small intestine to all of the gluten and gliadin proteins, right? Because the moment it gets to the small intestine, that's what the study shows, that's when you start to see transient damage happening to the gut lining, right? So we need to be able to break up those proteins in the stomach itself, which is really important. So the way we've designed the product is to have the right type of proteases and peptidases, and I'll talk about the difference between the two, that start working on those proteins in the stomach itself. And that's a really important advancement, because when you look at a lot of gluten-related enzymes that are out there, most of them are your standard digestive enzymes that are just kind of relabeled as gluten enzymes, right? They're just proteases that are for normal protein digestion that are relabeled as gluten enzymes. But that's not going to help because the gluten molecule and most of the gluten-related proteins are relatively small peptides, right? They're not big, long chains of protein like you get with whey protein or eating animal protein and so on. There's relatively small peptides. And what you need to do in order for them to not have a negative impact is you have to be able to cut the peptides on the outsides, from the outsides in, and from the insides out as well, right? So if you imagine a peptide that's a string of amino acids this way, you start cutting it from the outside in and then inside out. That's the difference between a endo and exopeptidase. So having both, having that endo and exopeptidase is really important because you need to really dismantle that protein completely so that it doesn't trigger an immunological response like it does in 100% of people, right? Again, that's the important message is it's in 100% of people. It's not just certain people. And so that endo and exopeptidases are really important. And then you have some proteases in case the gluten and all of the gluten-related molecules are stuck in bigger proteins. The proteases chop up the bigger proteins. The peptidases chop up the smaller bits of the proteins. And most of that goes to work in the stomach. That's the important part because, again, we don't want massive exposure of all of these proteins in the gut, in the small intestine itself, right? Exactly. So that's one really important aspect of it. And that's why we use that enzyme called tolerase G. Tolerase G is one of the key enzyme products that has been shown to be able to break up all of those gluten proteins in the stomach itself and not allow it to be exposed to the small intestine, right? So it's one of the most well-studied in that respect. Now, big question is, why do most products that are gluten digesting, why do they not use the tolerase G? Well, there's only one simple answer for that, and that's cost. It's not a cheap product, but many good products that are highly innovative aren't going to be cheap. But for us, in order for this product to work and actually help people, we have to have it in there. So that's a really, really critical aspect of it. The other part of it is we wanted to put some HCl in the product to help bring down the pH in the stomach, because the lower the pH is, the more you're going to get the proteins broken up and digested. And a lot of people suffer from inadequate pH in the stomach. So that's a really important aspect of protein digestion. We, of course, have the spores in there as well. The probiotic spores are in there in case some of that gluten gets past the stomach and ends up in the small intestine and starts triggering inflammation. The spores are really good. The probiotic spores are really good at bringing down inflammation in the gut lining. That's a critical part of their job. They also produce enzymes and can break up those proteins themselves. So they're in there as well to help with the overall inflammatory process that occurs during digestion. And then another very important step, which is not considered on any other gluten-related product, is the addition of lipase. Lipase is a fat digesting enzyme, right? And you might ask yourself, why did we put in a fat digesting enzyme when we're talking about proteins? Well, the reason is because gluten is a really, really unique protein in that it's lipid soluble, right? So most proteins are water soluble, right? If you had oil and water in a container, the protein would be in the oil, the water part, right? It wouldn't be in the oil part. Right. Most proteins are not oil soluble, but gluten is really unique in that it is partially oil soluble, which means that when you eat your diet, when you eat a meal that has gluten in it, fats in it, and so on, a lot of that gluten protein can actually be embedded and solubilized in the oil part of the diet, in the meal, right? And if it's in the oil part of the meal, it actually is protected from the effects of proteases, because proteases are water-based enzymes. They're called hydrolytic enzymes because they use water as part of the enzymatic action to break up proteins. So if you're gluten and you're hiding in an oil molecule, you're going to completely escape all of the protein digestion. And then you're going to end up in the small intestine where you're going to trigger inflammation. Now, the other problem with it being part of the oil is that the oils get readily absorbed into the small intestine because our cells are made up of lipids as well, right? So lipids transfer much easier through the cell lining. That's why oil-soluble vitamins and all that transfer through pretty easily. And so when you have gluten as part of the oil, it's going to get carried through automatically past the lining, which can then trigger more and more inflammation. So to us, it became really important to break up all of the fatty acids that are also in the diet using an enzyme that digests lipids so that we can release the gluten and it's not protected by the oil. So that's the kind of thinking we go deep into as we're looking at the problem at hand and trying to figure out how do we solve it, how do we create better innovation, how do we actually create relief for people. So the way everything we've put together alleviates the problem completely and allows people a little bit more food freedom, right? Because that's really, at the end of the day, when we're talking about quality of life and all that, that's what we want, right? We want a little bit more freedom to be able to go out and eat. We want, right? We want the freedom to not give the waiter or waitress the third degree, questioning everything that's happening in the restaurant's kitchen, right? And then even if we do all that, studies show that upwards of 50% of gluten-free foods out in the market contain gluten, right? So we're going to get exposed to it inevitably, but we want that degree of protection.
Right, absolutely. And as I mentioned, it definitely has been a lifesaver for me. I can go out to eat and feel a little sense of control over the situation because it kind of is a crapshoot, like you're saying. From 1/3 to 50% of all meals that are supposedly gluten-free can still be cross-contaminated. And it's really difficult. And I like what you said in the beginning too about it is it's not a license to go eat a sandwich, right? It definitely is not. And when I'm working with my clients, I don't introduce it right away because I'm working with people that are being referred to me from GI docs or allergists saying they have this new diagnosis, they have to follow a strict gluten-free diet, and we need you to help them get on board with this. And so that's my job, and I take it very seriously, but I also come from a very empathetic standpoint because I lived it and I understand it, and it is difficult, but it's not impossible. But things like the Wheat Rescue make it more doable so that we can still enjoy a night out with friends, or we can have a family meal over at someone else's house. And as long as we're taking some of the other precautions that I talk about in my book and also with my clients, we can feel rest assured that the Wheat Rescue is going to help maybe scoop up any damage that might come along should we be gluten. So definitely. Thank you so much from myself, and I know all my clients that are using your products. It's a wonderful product, and I'm thoroughly thrilled.
Thank
and I'm
you.
Always sad when it's out of stock. So please make more.
I know it's been hard to keep it in stock. That and another enzyme that we launched this year called FODMate. I don't know if you're familiar with FODMate.
Yeah, yes,
yeah.
I've seen that one too. Absolutely. That's a fantastic one.
Yeah, both of those have been
you guys
difficult
have
to keep in stock.
So many incredible products, and not to like deviate too far off our topics, but your phytospore has been tremendous for my little dog.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hands down has helped him out a lot. So thank you for that as well. So anyone listening, if you have a pet, their gut microbiome is also important, and the integrity of their gut is important as well. And so with that, let's talk about my favorite product, which is the Total Gut Restoration Program. It's absolutely wonderful. And there's 3 parts to it. So just to kind of introduce, and then I'll let you take it from there. So there's 3 parts, and we have the Megaspore probiotic, which works to recondition the gut. So if we want to, maybe we'll break this up in three segments, if you will. So we'll talk first about the Megaspore, and this is helping to recondition the gut. And why don't you let us know how that works and what it's doing for us?
Yeah, so, and I can give you the origins of how this came about as well, right? So we've been studying for the last 12, 13 years about how a dysfunctional microbiome leads to disease in the body, right? And the big question is all of, like, for example, that if someone comes in to see you with severe allergies, that there's a microbiome component to that, right? If somebody comes to you with diabetes, we know, there's a microbiome component to that. And then if somebody comes to you with, let's say, depression, gut-brain axis, there's a microbiome component to that. Now, those 3 conditions couldn't present more differently, right? Diabetes, depression, and then allergies or autoimmune diseases present completely differently. They even affect different parts of the body. We've got the brain, the pancreas, right? And then whatever the skin, wherever the allergy or the autoimmune condition is showing up. So our big question is, we know that the microbiome is involved in all of those conditions, and those are seemingly unrelated different conditions. The big question is, does the microbiome affect each of those conditions differently? Is it a different component of the microbiome, a different dysfunction within the microbiome that drives diabetes versus depression? Or is there some universal dysfunction going on in the microbiome that is the platform for all of these conditions, right? And the reason why this even came up was because the most common question we get from our practitioners that we work with, because we're predominantly a practitioner company, is how do I know what's wrong with my patient's microbiome, right? You get a patient coming in with anxiety, you get a patient coming in with autoimmune disease. The big question is, how do I know what's wrong with each of their microbiomes? Because I know instinctively and based on what I've read, I need to address the microbiome in both of these conditions. And so we took on a big project to really figure out what is wrong with the microbiome in all of these different conditions. And surprisingly, what we came to find out after several years of research and digging through the literature is that in conditions as different as reflux, depression, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, all of these presenting in different parts of the body, completely different disease pathologies, it's the exact same dysfunction in the microbiome that's driving all of these conditions, right? There's a universality to the dysfunction in the microbiome that provides the platform and the root cause for all of these different diseases to manifest. Now, that dysfunction that you have in your microbiome, whether it turns into diabetes first or an autoimmune disease first or a skin condition first, depends on other outlying factors, your genetics to some degree, lifestyle disorders, and so on, right? And so what we really realize is that in all of these conditions, in the vast majority of chronic conditions, it's the same fundamental dysfunctions within the microbiome, right? And so what are those fundamental dysfunctions? Well, it starts with that common term dysbiosis. Now, dysbiosis is a big, broad term that's hard to define for when you typically talk about it, because it just means like an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. But if you dig through the literature, there are really two very important aspects that are always present in dysbiosis. Aspect number one is low diversity in the gut microbiome. When your gut microbiome is low in diversity, you have all kinds of risk for all kinds of chronic illnesses, right? And it's varied. It can be things as much as bad as aging related issues, all the way to acne, right? So it's like simple things. It can affect a 15-year-old by giving him or her acne, and it can affect an 80-year-old by giving him or her dementia, right? So diversity in the microbiome is absolutely paramount to health, right? We know that. And then number two, when you lose diversity, part of what you lose are your keystone species. These are organisms that are so important that they are inversely correlated with disease, meaning when they are high, disease risk is low. When they're low, disease risk is high. And they hold up the rest of the microbiome and they maintain diversity. So loss of diversity and loss of keystone species are the two definitive markers of dysbiosis in the microbiome. And those are the definitive markers that can be tied back to thousands of research papers showing the connection to disease, right? So we have those two big problems of dysbiosis. Now, once you have dysbiosis, the next thing that happens is you start to get an overgrowth of opportunistic organisms. And these organisms are opportunistic in a number of ways. In one way, they can produce toxins. When they produce toxins, those toxins will lead to inflammation and damage to the lining of the gut, right? It starts recruiting immune cells, causing cellular disruption, causing inflammation in your gut lining. They're also opportunistic in the sense that they can eat away at the mucus layer that protects your gut lining, which acts as a physical barrier, right? So they destroy that mucus layer. Now, that mucus layer is so important. Exactly. And then you end up with that leaky gut issue. Now, when they eat away at the mucus layer, there's a couple of big problems with that. Number one, that mucus layer provides your immune system with a little bit of a barrier to say that, hey, there's some separation between the trillions of organisms that are sitting in your gut and the inside of your body, which is where your intestinal lining is, right? And so that provides a buffer. And in that buffer, your immune cells that are at the intestinal lining are constantly communicating with the microbes that are in the upper layer. And so when that buffer diminishes and gets eaten away, it breaks that barrier. Now your immune system freaks out that there are 40 trillion bacteria that are now infiltrating the body, right? So the immune system ends up recruiting lots and lots of immune cells constantly to the lining of your gut. That in itself drives inflammatory damage to the lining of the gut. That creates sensitivities to things like food particles and environmental particles and all that, because everything that comes into your system gets a big immune response. That also drives your immune system to attack your own commensal bacteria, right? And that becomes the foundation for all kinds of inflammatory conditions in the bowel, right? So that dysbiosis and that growth of opportunistic organisms sets up the reduction in the mucosa and then the formation of leaky gut by dismantling the tight junctions and all that in between your intestinal epithelial cells, right? So when you look at the disease pathology of the vast majority of chronic illnesses that we deal with, all of them have this at the root cause, right? This process. It starts with dysbiosis. Then it goes to lowering of important postbiotics like short chain fatty acids and all that. Those postbiotics that are made by the good bacteria maintain this structure of the system, right? So as that goes down, then the structure starts getting eaten away. And then finally, we have severe leaky gut, severe immune dysfunctions in the digestive tract. And we know that 70–80% of the immune system is in the digestive tract. So when the digestive immune system is dysfunctional, the rest of your immune system is dysfunctional as well, right? Your sinuses are going to react differently to things. Your lungs are going to react. Your skin, everything reacts differently to the world around you. So having gone through that, we said, okay, in order to address this big root cause that's at the foundation of virtually every chronic issue, then we have to systematically repair that broken down system in the order in which the things go wrong, right? And so the first part of the total gut restoration is to address the dysbiosis. And it addresses a couple of things, well, three main things. It addresses diversity. It addresses the keystone species, the low levels of keystone species, and it addresses the high levels of opportunistic organisms. What we've been able to show is with Megaspore, the spore-based probiotic, that Megaspore increases the growth of keystone species. It increases diversity within the microbiome, and the spores compete against all of this overgrowth of opportunistic organisms, right? So we can bring down the opportunistic organisms, increase the diversity of good bacteria, and then in particular, increase the growth of keystone species. And that is the first important thing to do, because that's the first thing that goes wrong in the system, right? So the reconditioning, step one of the total gut restoration, addresses this first dysfunction.
Right, and that's a perfect segue into the second part of the dysfunction, which is if you have all the probiotics in the world, but you don't feed them their particular food, right, the prebiotics, then we're really just putting good money after bad. We're not solving the problem. So in comes the Mega Pre, which helps to reinforce. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the great things about how the microbiome works is that once you start gaining traction with the right organisms in the system, it's going to be those organisms themselves that maintain stability within the system, right? So the keystone species are very important for that. As you start getting more Akkermansia, Ficellum bacteria, Bifidolongum, those type of keystone species coming up, it is those species that are going to continue to increase diversity and continue to improve the overall ecosystem of the microbiome. And so the idea here is that we start with the reconditioning, we start giving those organisms a leg up in their ability to start to regrow. But then in the next phase, in the second month, we want to really reinforce the growth of those beneficial species. So what we've done is we've gone about looking for what we call precision prebiotics, ones that are specifically designed to feed those keystone species. Because as you feed those keystone species and as their numbers increase, they will then start increasing the diversity of the microbiome even more and start increasing the production of things like short chain fatty acids and other postbiotics that are required for the subsequent repair steps, right? So we are reconditioning the microbiome. We're starting to make a change in the ecosystem with step 1. In step 2, we are reinforcing that change so that becomes more like your permanent microbiome, right? Because what we want to do ultimately is have a healthy but also resilient microbiome, right? And we want the microbiome to be resilient because, again, better quality of life, right? We want you to be able to go out and have a fun weekend and not really pay attention and do things that we know aren't great for us, right? Have drinks and stay up late and eat, food that's not ideal and still be okay, right? And not that it's a license to do that every single day, but we want people to have the resilience to be able to do 80% good, 20%, you're relaxing and still do fine, right? That's quality of life to me, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, definitely. And so we've addressed building up the microbiota. I'm sorry. Are we good?
A pop-up came in that slowed it down for a second. So yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I think okay. No, we're good on this side too. Okay, we'll continue. So we've addressed, building up the microbiota. It really is a true ecosystem. I love this. This is very sciencey. I hope people that are watching are following along, but I am like gobbling up every ounce of what you're throwing down here because this is my wheelhouse. This is what I love. But we also do need to address the megamucosa, which is the third leg of the stool, really, in this tripod of a product, the Total Gut Restoration Program, because the megamucosa helps us to rebuild the mucosal system. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the reason why this is typically in step 3 is because the megamucosa is made up of tools that a healthy microbiome would use in order to rebuild and maintain that important mucosal system, right? That mucosal system is the largest sampling site in your body. It's the important conduit in which the microbiome speaks to your immune system. And it's a critical aspect of maintaining health, wellness, and resilience. If the mucosal system is diminished and eaten away, that is in itself a major risk factor for chronic illness, right? And lots of chronic illnesses are associated with having a diminished mucosal system. And it's the microbiome's job to build and maintain that mucosal system. However, the microbiome cannot do that if it's dysbiotic. So the idea is that we fix the dysbiosis in step 1 and 2. Now that we have an improved microbiome, we're going to provide that microbiome with the tools it needs to repair that. So the key tools for that are 4 main amino acids. These amino acids are the building blocks of the mucosa because the microbiome is going to stimulate the rebuilding of the mucosa, but if you don't have the building blocks of it, your system can't put it together, right? And so we've seen and we've examined studies that show when you have these 4 key amino acids, it increases the rebuilding of the mucosa by about 95%. So just having adequate amounts of the building blocks are going to be critical. The other parts that we have in there are polyphenols. Polyphenols are really important for the microbes that rebuild the mucosa. Not only does it provide an antioxidant component to reduce inflammation in the mucosa, which is absolutely critical to rebuilding it, because during the process of inflammation, you cannot rebuild it, right? It's like rebuilding it during an attack, an activity that's going on, right? It's like you're trying to clean the pool while people are in the pool, right? It just doesn't work. You got to get the people out of the pool and have a moment to clean it up. So that's a really important step as well, the polyphenols, and that's utilized by a lot of the really critical keystone bacteria. And then another part is the IgG. The immunoglobulin G has been shown in severe leaky gut cases where there's severe diminished mucosa to be able to support the rebuilding of the mucosa to realign the immune response in people with damaged mucosas, right? So that becomes really important. And again, that provides the impetus for the system to repair itself. So it's detoxifying, it's binding up toxins, it's binding up things like mold toxins, bacterial toxins, viral particles, food toxins, so that all of those things don't hinder repair, on the system. So that becomes a toolbox that your new healthy microbiome will use to rebuild your system and provide resilience.
It's fantastic. It is a wonderful program. The first time I did it, I was feeling so much better within just a couple of weeks, and I was really surprised at how quickly things started to turn around. And I share this with my clients, and it is truly a testimony, because I had tried other methods that I had learned. I've studied functional nutrition, integrative nutrition, and of course I studied under Dr. Tom, and there were other methods that were employed before I learned about your products and your company, and certainly the total gut restoration. And I never got I never felt like I got full response that I did with the TGR. And I'll say that because I had some severe food sensitivities. Now, obviously, it's not going to undo my gluten-related disorder, right? So that's what it is. It's there to stay, and I learned how to live with that, and that's what I coach a lot of my clients around, adopting that lifestyle, right? It's not a diet. This is a lifestyle. It's a complete change. But in terms of my other food sensitivities, these are foods I ate my whole life, but I was now reacting to strawberries and grapes and tomatoes and chocolate, and I'm getting rashes and flushing and swollen lip, and like, how is this possible? What's happening? And it wasn't until I did the total gut restoration that all of a sudden, after I actually did it for 2 rounds, because I thought it took decades for me to fall apart, right? It's going to take probably a little bit for me to put back together. So I did it twice. And after the second round, I got a little bold and brazen one day, and I was cutting strawberries, and I thought, let me just, like a tiny sliver, right, and see what happens. And the next day I had just a little bit more, until the end of the week I had a full strawberry, and my face did not get as red as the strawberry. So eventually, over time, I started to fold back in each of these things. I could eat tomatoes without itching from head to toe. I could have grapes again, and chocolate. That was the best. That was a gift. Thank you so much for that, because I was a professed alcoholic, and then to all of a sudden not be able to eat it. And then doing the TGR, like I said, I can now eat chocolate, and I'm a very happy girl for that. So thank you.
No, that's awesome. And, your story is exactly what we see, right? Number one, in that sensitivities keep increasing.
Yeah.
Right. That's a common thing. And that's because as I said, when the mucosal layer gets diminished, right? And what happens because of that, your immune system is trying to defend the body, because it thinks all of these trillions of organisms are going to invade. So it recruits lots of innate immune cells to the lining of the gut, which means that everything that enters into that area gets an immune response, like a strawberry, like, dairy proteins, everything. Almost anything you eat will get an immune response. And when it gets an immune response in the gut being the central command center for the rest of the immune system, you see it everywhere in your body, right? That is called the loss of oral tolerance. Yes. Right? Because our immune system now does not know how to tolerate the things that it should be tolerating, and attacking the things it should be attacking, because it's lost that communication tool, which is the mucosa. When you rebuild the mucosa, you can rebuild oral tolerance. Your immune system will learn again what to attack and what not to attack as it's communicating through the mucosa with the microbiome. Right? So it's a really important lesson. I think your case is really a great example of how you can revert the issues, the spiraling down issues that are occurring, if you take a systems biology approach to rebuilding the problem, right? Or engineering your way out of the problem.
Absolutely. And that's, being trained in functional nutrition, that's one of the first things that we're taught, is we got to get to the root cause. We need to find out what is going on in there. And so by doing strategic testing, by being able to figure out what's happening, and a lot of clients come to me and the first thing they say is, I think I need to test for food sensitivities. And as I do a full medical history and I hear about, I've been taking 800 milligrams of ibuprofen daily for years because I have this chronic pain, and I'm thinking it's shredding your gut lining, and this is a leaky gut
Mhm.
issue. This is not a food sensitivity issue. That's kind of downstream. That's not what's happening upstream. So yeah, I think
Right.
this has been a lifesaver for me. And like I said, I've introduced many clients to your products and all with rave reviews. It's been fantastic. I have, I see some questions popping in. The one here from Beverly, what is your ETA on the wheat rescue? She's been trying to order.
Yeah, excellent question. And in fact, I just had a production meeting today. So I do know that it's going to be produced more than likely next week. So we're
Okay.
hoping that by mid-November, we will actually have it ready to go. So in about 2 weeks or so.
Okay, perfect. All right, so Beverly, you're hearing that in the next 2 weeks, keep your eyes out. And so for my clients, like I said, I don't generally start them off with, okay, you've been diagnosed and now here's the plan for gluten-free or dairy-free or what have you. And oh, by the way, the wheat rescue will take away all your pain. No, I generally tell them steer clear. Let's learn about clean eating. Let's learn about cross-contamination. Let's learn about how not to cross-contaminate even in our own home with food storage and food prep and things like that before they go out
Right.
and get the wheat rescue. And let's get the total gut restoration on board and let's get started with doing some of that repair work like you mentioned. So is there anything else
Totally.
that you
Yeah.
could share with us that I haven't addressed so far? I know we were talking about the wheat rescue and the total gut restoration. Some people, you did mention the IgG, the mega IgG. When would somebody know that it was a good idea to put that on board with their total gut restoration versus not needing it at all?
Yeah, so that is ideal and really important for people who have had lots of antibiotics
Mm-hmm.
in their process of going through their health issues. People who have had known or suspected mold exposure, so you have mycotoxin problems. That's a
Right.
critical product in being able to kind of bind up and reduce the impact of mycotoxins. And then people who have known infections,
Okay.
who know that they have overgrowth of X, Y, or Z pathogen and have been dealing with that for some time. That's an ideal product then to start adding into your TGR as
Okay.
an add-on. Another thing, one of the probably now the after Megaspore, the second most successful product we've ever launched is one we just launched called ZenBiome. ZenBiome is a
Okay.
gut-brain product, right, which
Mhm.
dramatically reduces cortisol and neuroinflammation. It changes brainwave function. It improves theta waves. It improves sleep. It does all kinds of things, and it reduces overall inflammation and inflammation in the gut as well. It's a really unique product, and the reason why it's so relevant is because a lot of people who are dealing with food sensitivities, gut issues, and all
Mhm.
that also have severe anxiety, right? Or
Right.
at least stress, daily chronic stress issues, right? And here's why that's so important, because chronic stress and a certain level of basal anxiety actually causes dysbiosis. It causes the proliferation of opportunistic pathogens in your system. There's lots of
Mhm.
pathogens that have evolved to look for elevated levels of cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine before they express their virulence factors, right? So as you have daily bouts of stress and you're dealing with anxiousness throughout the day, you're actually creating dysbiosis in your gut, right? So one of the critical aspects is bringing down that anxiety, bringing down that depression, bringing down the stress and mood issues that people feel day to day. That actually
Mhm.
is very healing to the gut. And so
Oh,
Zen
okay.
Biome does it through the gut brain connection, and can be an amazing tool for people to really help them progress, because not only, of course, are they helping the dysbiosis in the gut heal faster, but they also feel better, right? Because
Right.
mentally, all of this stuff is so stressful, right? And drives
Oh,
anxiousness.
definitely.
So that's a great
Yes.
add-on for people. Gut issues and mood issues go hand in hand, right? They're one and the same.
Definitely, definitely. I see that in a lot of my clients. I would be hard pressed to say that there wasn't one person that came to me that didn't have some level of anxiety in addition to all of their gut
Yeah.
dysbiosis. Um, very, very true. Very true. So in your recommendation, once someone were to complete the TGR, what would be next steps? In my personal life, what I have done is I've stuck with the probiotic and the prebiotic, just as my daily go-to. You're saying that the Zen Biome would also be a good add-on for that, or would it replace something else?
No, it'd be a good add-on, and you would take the Zen Biome until you feel like you've got the gut-brain mood issues under control, right? When your tolerance level increases, where so many things don't overwhelm you and get you stressed and anxious so easily. That's all called HPA hyperactivation, right? Your HPA axis is constantly activated, and that's a gut issue. And then that activation actually creates more dysbiosis. So you would continue to use the Zen Biome until you felt like you've got really good stable foundation in the mood side of things, right? So, and then when you do have stable foundation, you can use that intermittently. You don't necessarily have to use it every day. You can use the Zen Biome 2 or 3 times a week, right? And then on the gut side, when we're looking at the TGR, a lot of people do kind of what you did, Karen, where you do it for one cycle, which is a 90-day cycle. And at the end of the cycle, you might feel like a significant amount of improvement, but you know, like there's a little bit more to go, right? So then they might do a second cycle. They might do another 90 days to really get them to where they need to be. And once you feel you're in a place where like I've made significant strides on my system, then you do the Megaspore every day as maintenance, right? The Megaspore becomes critical to continuously managing the ecosystem in the gut microbiome. And then like you do the Mega Pre occasionally or daily. I do the Mega Pre and the mucosa mixed. I do it probably 3 times a week. And a lot of people will do that as intermittently as well, right? It's good to get that into your system on a somewhat regular basis, but you don't have to do the full TGR forever, right? So you can do it on a maintenance level too.
Absolutely. So one other question that just popped to mind as we're talking, you know, there's so many tests that people have access to, so many sensitivity tests that are out there, mold testing and things like that. And would you say that it would be smart money spent to start with the total gut restoration and see what kind of issues you might be able to expose and clear out before you spend a lot of money on all of this excess testing that maybe could just be redirected and recorrected through the gut microbiome, through the TGR?
And that's a fantastic point. That's something I talk to functional medicine docs about all the time, right? Because when somebody comes and their system is broken, and you do a test, you're really checking them at their most broken stage, right? And we know, like even in your case, that when your system was really dysfunctional, you were sensitive to far more things than you needed to be, right? And you're not sensitive to those things anymore, right? So do we want to see what people are sensitive to when they're at their most broken, or do we want to see what people are truly sensitive to at their core, right? When their system is even somewhat healthy, there may be a few things that you still have to keep avoiding, like in your case, gluten, right? You have to be smart about it and reduce your exposure and all that, even when your system is now much healthier than it was before. So I would absolutely say, and because the TGR is addressing the root cause problems around all of these sensitivities, all of these issues, it's so much, it makes a lot more sense to do a round of TGR, at least one round, get the system moving back into the right direction, and then take a look and see, okay, what are some really core issues that my system has, right? And what you may find is after 1, maybe 2 rounds of TGR, you may not need to do any more tests, right? You're doing just fine at that point, right? And your system is back to how it used to be when you had better tolerance and you had more resilience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. I could listen to this all day long. It's great to finally meet you face to face. I know we've communicated through messaging and email. This has been wonderful. And certainly if I have any other questions that come in after the fact, like I said, I'm going to post this and pin it to the top of my Facebook page and send alerts out elsewhere in social media. But if any other questions pop up that I can't answer, I will be sure to direct everything back your way, or at least pop a question in your inbox so that I can address it for you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Karen, and I'll make sure we post this as well. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about the products that we've put so much blood, sweat, and tears and time into. You know, our whole goal is really kind of creating tools for people to just live better, healthier lives. And it's always exciting to be able to talk about it. And then hear, you know, actual people, humans like yourself that have benefited from them,
Yeah.
and that have clients that benefited from them, right? That's why we do what we do. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Of course, of course. It's my pleasure. I certainly appreciate you as well. And I know that everyone watching will be asking me tons of questions because we know that all of them are probably suffering at some level. So, but thank you so much.
Yeah.
You have a wonderful rest of your day and a good evening. And I'm sure we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.